She inspired a lot of people through her kindness and through her willingness to want to help.
They were family first and friends second.
We thought that Shannon would be a good influence on Tiana.
But when someone can't live up to expectations, the desire to be better can turn sinister.
They were kind of the flip sides of the same coin.
I saw a little jealousy here and there.
And a wicked betrayal eclipses a shining star.
You're not just thinking about them, you're looking at them, you're living with them, you're breathing the same air.
All I can say is that I let a monster into my home. My name is Marva Brathwaite. I am the proud mother of Shannon T. Brathwaite. I had an amazing relationship with my daughter. It was memorable all along. Our house, growing up, it was just the two of us, but it was always filled with laughter. I was very young when I had Shannon. She was born 9/9/92 at 9:05 p.m. She was amazing. She changed my life completely. Being a Christian, I believe in raising her the way the Bible said to raise her. So even as a baby, walking her to school, we would talk about God, we would talk about the scripture. She started going to church at the age of 5.
Shannon did really well in school. She did all of her activities. She attended church and she was very active in her community.
Shannon was a part of the youth program. And what she did as it relates to the other youth that were a part of the program, she inspired them. She lifted them up and she did not allow them to think less of themselves.
Dancing was her passion. She danced for her church. So we used to make our own dances and stuff like that. And I was like, I'm not a dancer. She's like, well, you're gonna be. Shannon was a force of nature. I will say that. She inspired a lot of people. Through her kindness and through her willingness to want to help.
She loved music. She loved poetry.
Far, far beyond her years. The things that she was thinking, just her point of view of life. And during this time, Obama was running for presidency. So I feel like because of that, a lot of the youth were engaged in social issues more than they had ever been before, because it was mostly urban youth. So her point of view on things of society were the things that she wrote about.
Everyone knows Shannon is destined for greatness, and her mother rewards her for her hard work.
So being an only child, she was spoiled. She was so spoiled. She got everything she wanted. And the reason why was because she was a good kid.
On September 9, 2008, Marva is excited to celebrate Shannon's sweet 16 birthday.
A new cell phone came out, and she wanted it so badly. And I went and purchased it. She wanted a special pair of sneakers. I got her the sneakers.
And she got the MP3 player and the camera. During that time frame, everybody wanted those things. So yes, she was incredibly excited. She was incredibly grateful.
To all those who know her, Shannon has the perfect life. And she brings her close friend and cousin, Tiana Brown, along for the ride.
Tiana Brown was born May 21st, 1993, and her childhood was drastically different from Shannon's.
Her nuclear parents had never really been part of her life, and she had been within the care of her maternal grandmother, along with some half-siblings.
We went to the house, Jenny's house, the grandmother house. Once in a while, they started to get close.
But Shannon had a very busy schedule, so Tiana didn't really get to spend as much time with her as she wanted to. They attended completely different schools and had different home lives.
And then, I heard that she was having problems in school. I was doing good. I was working. Work, church, home. Work, church, home. Shannon did her activities. We thought that Shannon would be a good influence on Tiana.
On September 28, 2008, the Brathwaites invite Tiana to come stay with them in their home.
So when Shannon told me about her cousin, she was like, hey, my cousin is moving in. I remember her saying that she was really excited about it because she's been an only child, and she was excited that her cousin was going to be there and she had someone her age that she could possibly relate to. That's just how Miss Marva is. She opens her doors to the people that she loves and the people that she wants to help. And it was more so of a helping factor, and Shannon really wanted to help her cousin. She wanted to bond with her cousin.
But beneath the seemingly happy surface, a deadly mix of envy and rage is brewing. Just 2 days after Tiana moves in, the 15-year-old makes a frantic 911 call from inside the Brathwaite home.
She had indicated in that 911 call that she was hiding in the apartment because an individual that she described as Yusuf had forced his way into the apartment and had threatened both girls and ended up stabbing Shannon.
Before they can identify Tiana's location, the call drops. Minutes later, dispatchers receive a second call.
At 4:35 p.m., dispatch receives another phone call, but this time from Shannon's mother, Marva.
Got to my door. And I'm turning the lock.
She had trouble opening her door, her front door, which opened in because Shannon's body was wedged against it, and she discovered her there, stabbed.
I saw my daughter laying right there on the floor, lifeless. And I laid my hands on my daughter, and I was trying to pray for her, that she would get up. I knew she was gone.
Tiana was not there. Tiana was gone.
I ran out the house. I was knocking on everybody's door.
Paramedics are dispatched to the scene, but it's too late.
After that, the cops came. They didn't want me to be there. We had to wait for them to remove my daughter's body.
Before being escorted away, Marva tells officers that Tiana Brown is missing.
So we were thinking someone maybe broke into the house because the door was bolted, so they had to go through the window. So everyone was looking for her. Everyone was concerned.
On September 30th, 2008, police are investigating the brutal murder of Shannon Brathwaite after her cousin Tiana Brown called 911 and vanished.
Shannon had been horribly stabbed multiple times. The actual knife that had been used was recovered from the crime scene. It was a household kitchen knife. So in other words, it wasn't a weapon that somebody was carrying around. It was something that came from the house and was used in the house.
Once Shannon's body is removed from the scene, detectives turn their attention to Marva Brathwaite.
I had to compose myself. I knew then I had to stay strong for my family. If I crashed, everybody would have crashed.
They learned from interviewing Marva the situation where Tiana had been taken in, that she was living there.
Marva explains that the girls had stayed home from school that day due to the Rosh Hashanah holiday.
Since, this was the holiday, she was like, Mommy, I just want to stay home, right? So I said, okay, you guys stay in the house. I had to go and get her school supplies.
Based on Tiana Brown's frantic 911 call, police believe they're looking for a suspect named Yusuf.
She's talking about being afraid. She's talking about having witnessed Yusuf cutting her cousin Shannon.
We didn't know anyone by the name of Yusuf.
Marva says Tiana had only been living there a few days and concedes she may have been running with the wrong crowd.
Tiana was taken in as a temporary measure by Marva because Tiana was frankly uncontrollable by her grandmother in the house that she lived in. She was a serial truant and a serial runaway. And basically, Marva was a strict disciplinarian and a strong Christian woman. And she thought they'd be able to provide some structure for Tiana.
According to Marva, life seemed to be turning around for Tiana exactly as they had hoped.
When she came to the house, there were rules. You go to school, when you get out of school, make sure this is the time you come here. So she did what she was told. She went to school and she came straight back.
There was no indication that she'd had any violence in her background.
Family don't do that. She didn't have that in her. She wouldn't have been in my house.
Following Marva's statement, detectives walk through the apartment. That's when they make an unsettling discovery.
Marva at that time was running a daycare within the apartment. As part of that, she had various instructional aids and everything around. One of these was a magnet board that had the alphabet's letters, and spelled along that magnet board was the name Yusuf.
Marva also realizes that several items are missing.
Tiana, in her initial call to 911, said nothing about robbery or the taking of any possessions, but these items were noted to be missing. Shannon's prized pair of high-end sneakers that had been recently acquired as a gift for her from Marva in recognition of her academic achievement, her cell phone, a camera that she had recently acquired.
With Tiana missing, police know they must act quickly to find the 15-year-old.
The police put out that alert. They were looking for her to see whether she was a perpetrator whether she was a victim, whether she had been injured, what other information did she have concerning what had occurred, trying to flesh out this rather curious 911 call talking about this individual, Yusuf.
At just 16, Shannon Brathwaite was the daughter every mother dreamed of. She was a star student, active in her church and community, and mature beyond her years. Hours into her murder investigation, NYPD detectives have another urgent issue. Shannon's 15-year-old cousin, Tiana Brown, is missing.
At the same time, the police detectives were contacting Jennifer Brown and asking if she had any idea where Tiana was, and she did not.
Authorities immediately sit down with Tiana's grandmother to learn more about the young woman.
But it was learned that her past had been troubled, and subsequently the DA's office learned about what could be described as antisocial behavior. As she got older and transitioned into puberty, she had several runaway and truant incidents culminating in sexual assaults against her.
Part of Tiana's story is that she was raped approximately 2 years before the murder happened. And what happens when a rape goes untreated, especially in a teenager who's still forming character and developing in many areas of her life, is that there's this sense of shame. There's this sense of, I have to run. She was running away. She was not abiding by rules.
Around this time, Tiana began having nightmares and blackouts during arguments with her sister.
It is very possible, especially in the context of trauma, for someone to disassociate or black out, especially in a heightened state of stress.
She was never physically violent, but oftentimes could not remember what happened during the course of their argument, which left her scared and confused.
Based on Tiana's painful past and the chilling evidence at the scene, detectives began piecing together a troubling new theory.
Yusuf was spelled out with the magnetic letters on this board. I mean, who would do that? It's just ridiculous. If there really was a Yusuf who really was an assailant, why would he take the time and find the available alphabet numbers to say, yo, Yusuf was here, I'm the guy that did it? Nobody would do that. And I think gradually it dawned on them that Yusuf was a figment of Tiana's imagination. I don't think any of us wants to believe that a person of that age is capable of such sustained violence, especially against somebody that she's related to. But it was certainly trending in that direction.
Within 24 hours, the search for Tiana comes to an end when detectives receive the call they've been waiting for.
So while they're looking for Tiana, they were contacted by a friend of Tiana's by the name of Louis. And Louis informed the police that Tiana was with him and that Tiana had mentioned that her cousin had been stabbed.
Authorities immediately travel to the location and find Tiana, who doesn't appear surprised to see them.
She is not upset. She's strangely stoic. She was found with Shannon's sneakers. In fact, she was wearing them. She also had other property that belonged to Shannon, including an MP3 player, the camera, and she had Shannon's cell phone. She also had other property that belonged to Shannon, including an MP3 player, the camera, and she had Shannon's cell phone. She also had other property that belonged to Shannon, including an MP3 player, the camera, and she had Shannon's cell phone. She also had other property that belonged to Shannon, including an MP3 player, the camera, and she had Shannon's cell phone.
Tiana is taken to the police department for questioning. And the story she tells will open a window into the mind of an unstable young woman. The day after Shannon Brathwaite's tragic murder, New York police tracked down her missing 15-year-old cousin, Tiana Brown. At this time, police have no direct evidence that ties Tiana to the murder, but she's found in possession of Shannon's most prized personal items, raising suspicions about her innocence.
The police are not required to give her Miranda warnings before questioning her, so long as they are questioning her as to just why is she missing.
She asks detectives, "I'm here because of my cousin, right?"
And she proceeded to tell a story that she went to what she described as a voodoo lady, somebody that was a seer or a medium who could forecast her future.
This voodoo lady told her that she had to get out of her cousin's house immediately because she saw a lot of blood in her future.
Tiana says she was spooked, but she returned to the Brathwaite apartment the same day.
The next day, Marva went to run errands and left the girls at home. They were messaging friends as normal teenagers would.
She said then that the two of them had an argument, supposedly over text messages and who was looking over whose shoulder trying to see what the text messages were, and that Shannon proceeded to make fun of her, as Tiana put it, the way Shannon always did.
Tiana then tells detectives that during this fight, Shannon pulled out a bat. She was so scared for her life that she went into the kitchen to grab a knife so that she could defend herself.
Then she claims she blacked out.
A blackout can most definitely be triggered by anger because you don't know reality from your anger. Your brain goes into this transient consciousness and it literally loses consciousness and reacts.
At which point they stop her and say, "We're not going to question you now at this point. We've got to get your grandma down here in order to question you about this."
The minute Jennifer walks into the room where Tiana is, Tiana breaks down crying, runs to her, and starts saying, "I am sorry, I didn't mean to cut her."
Jennifer attempts to quiet Tiana and places her hand to her mouth.
Tiana's reaction to that was to take her grandmother's hand out of her face and continue her rant.
Tiana claimed that that prophecy had come true. She said that she had cut her cousin and that she was sorry. Jennifer literally pulls Tiana into her bosom to muffle what she is talking about and informs the police that she doesn't want to have her granddaughter questioned without an attorney.
Authorities place Tiana under arrest for the murder of Shannon Brathwaite. Shannon's loved ones are stunned to learn of the heartbreaking betrayal.
It pissed me off, just to be plain and simple, because it was just confusing to me, because they took you in, they invited you into their house for you to do something like that.
I did not see any signs. to say, well, okay, I saw a little jealousy here and there.
Did it ever cross your mind that Tiana could be involved?
Absolutely not. I didn't think she had that in her. All I can say is that I let a monster into my home.
There was never any indication that Shannon had any violent tendencies. When you start talking about the two cousins, Tiana and Shannon, they were kind of the flip sides of the same coin. Shannon was pretty. She was smart. She was an accomplished student. She had lots of friends. Tiana, on the other hand, was basically a loner aside from some other people who were in similar situations of being in unstable homes and school truants. So everything that Shannon was and had were things that Tiana was not and did not have. They were as polar opposites as any two related people could be.
When you have an amazing personality, when you have a mom that is behind you 100% and wants the best for you, the only motive would be jealousy, because maybe you want that for yourself.
Just one day after 16-year-old Shannon Brathwaite's murder, New York police have arrested her cousin, 15-year-old Tiana Brown, for the horrific crime.
I, of course, studied the autopsy findings in depth and the nature and location of the injuries on Shannon's body. She had suffered over 50 cutting injuries that were inflicted by knife. You looked at it, this was almost a person in a frenzy or a rage. The number and infliction of injuries to Shannon's face and throat and head indicated an intent to disfigure, an intent to take away that God-given beauty that Shannon had.
Shortly after the arrest, detectives speak with Tiana's friend Louis to learn more about her mental state in the hours after the stabbing.
He had said that Tiana had come to his house and was initially very upset because of this stabbing of her cousin. However, Louis became a little bit suspicious because she very quickly got over being upset about stabbing the cousin.
Louis reveals that Tiana had claimed Shannon had given her the brand new sneakers, as well as her camera, which Tiana had been playing with throughout the time they spent together.
We got a warrant for the camera, which was being retained, so that we could see what pictures were on there. And there were, in fact, pictures of Tiana looking anything but upset about what had happened to her cousin, as opposed to showing a saddened, distraught, crushed teen, crushed about the horrible thing that had happened to somebody who she claimed she loved. It just showed, in my mind, somebody who couldn't have cared less.
Two years after the murder, on what should have been Shannon Brathwaite's 18th birthday, Tiana Brown's murder trial begins.
There's a special category of crimes for people of her age, which are designated juvenile offenders and are tried in adult court. Intentional murder in the second degree is one of those charges. There really was no question for the jury about who had done it or how they had done it. The whole question was, what was her state of mind, and was she criminally responsible for what had occurred? The defense made it clear that insanity was their defense. They called a psychiatrist who had interviewed Tiana and had come up with the opinion that she was not criminally responsible, and specifically referred to this being a product of the rarest form of PTSD, which is the flashback. I thought the defense that was presented, particularly the whole idea that this was a flashback to a rape which may or may not have occurred, was ludicrous.
Prosecutors hold nothing back when presenting their case. That obsession had been building in Tiana for some time.
Despite what the defense experts said, it was a faux mental disease, and it had nothing to do with why she killed Shannon Braithwaite, which in my mind was just pure base jealousy and envy.
So what we're looking at is being jealous or being envious of someone and then living within their quarters. Now you're not just thinking about them, you're looking at them, you're living with them, you're breathing the same air.
She definitely had the fuse to a time bomb when she murdered Shannon, and it was an extremely short fuse. A fuse that had been cut down by years and years of what she thought were degradations to her and excuses that she had made for her choice to engage in antisocial behavior. And what lit the fuse, in my mind, just getting that overt jealousy of Shannon's excellence sort of rubbed in her face by their presence together, their close presence together. That's why I think set it off. I feel that she had left enough trail of competence, including intentional diversions away from what she had done. I wanted to emphasize to the jury the 911 call blaming Yusuf and making up the magnetic board. What I argued to a jury was that Tiana was so motivated by her jealousy over characteristics and features that Shannon possessed, that this was not only to end her life, this was to end all of those talents and attributes that Shannon had.
So if I take my cousin out and kill her to the point where she doesn't only die, but she disfigured in the process, then I have everything and she no longer has her beauty or her life.
After more than 2 weeks of testimony, the case is heading to the jury when everything falls apart for the prosecution.
The defense attorney comes and says, "I'm making a motion for mistrial." I'm like, "What?" He says, "Well, Marva has a criminal record and you didn't disclose that." Marva was a substantive witness in the case in terms of, making the discovery, identifying her daughter's body, and relating the conversations that she had had with Tiana before. And so part of the rules in New York is you have to turn over about witnesses everything that would affect their credibility in terms of a criminal record, hospitalizations, things like that.
They're trying to take my past for the murder of my daughter, use that against me. So now I'm like embarrassed because I totally forgot about it. I was young, right? But the only way that this lawyer would know about this would be how? The grandmother, huh?
They knew about it. They just saved it because things weren't looking so good for them in termination. They wanted to get a second trial. And It ended up being a mistrial.
The mistrial was because of me.
After 2 weeks of testimony, Tiana Brown's defense team has secured a mistrial, citing prosecutorial error that they did not disclose that the mother of victim Shannon Brathwaite had a prior criminal record.
Marva is completely devastated that her own family would use her past against her.
I'm gonna tell you how much it hurt. It hurt so much, we will never be family again. Because what you showed me, that was beyond devilish. I had to keep on fighting. Not for me, for my daughter. She's still my daughter.
In June of 2011, Tiana's second trial begins.
The second trial was a rerun of the first trial. There wasn't anything that we had to change. In effect, the defense arguments were all written in stone. They couldn't change them up without losing, credibility. I had no apprehension that things would end up any differently than where I thought they were going in the first trial. Well, the verdict came back fairly quickly, and it was guilty of murder in the second degree.
Building was lifted off of me. The weight, it was bittersweet. It was bittersweet because I was fighting for my daughter. Now it's actually over. I had to fight for her. The fight is over. That means I gotta let her rest.
Tiana Brown got the maximum sentence that a juvenile offender could get for murder in the second degree, which is 15 years to life.
I did wish her well, but I wished her well behind bars. And while she was there, I hope she found God. The same thing Shannon and I tried to teach her.
I think Tiana wanted to take Shannon's exemplary and certainly storybook perfect kind of life to make up in her mind, and it's a warped perception, what she believed that she should be, what she believed that she should have had, with all the privileges that came along with it, that she thought, why her, why not me?
I don't want anything from Tiana Brown. She holds no power over me. There is no answer that she can give me that will bring comfort. Oh no. My God brings me comfort. What I do know is that God graced me with an amazing daughter.
If Shannon was still alive, I think that every journal entry, every hope for the future, every hope that she had, I feel like she would have achieved those things.
Love covers a multitude of sin. So, the legacy that I would believe should be carried out for my daughter. Love. Doesn't matter the color.
There are nights when silence feels heavier than any scream. Nights when an entire neighborhood appears frozen beneath porch lights and autumn leaves, while somewhere in the darkness, a single act of violence changes history forever. The streets look ordinary. The houses stand untouched. Families lock their doors, believing tomorrow will arrive, just like yesterday. But sometimes tomorrow never comes for someone. Sometimes a mystery is born so complete, so cruel, that it survives generations, swallowing memories, friendships, reputations, and lives long after the blood has disappeared from the ground. October 30th, 1975, the evening before Halloween. In the wealthy community of Belhaven, Greenwich, Connecticut, children and teenagers wandered from house to house celebrating what locals affectionately called Mischief Night. It was a tradition built on harmless pranks. Toilet paper draped across trees. Doorbells rang before laughing teenagers disappeared into the darkness. Eggs splattered against sidewalks. Parents smiled. Police rarely worried. It was supposed to be the safest place imaginable. Belhaven wasn't simply another American neighborhood. It represented privilege, influence, and security. Massive estates sat behind stone walls. Luxury cars rested in spotless driveways. Executives, financiers, and influential families lived side by side, believing crime belonged somewhere else, somewhere beyond the gates. That illusion was about to collapse. Among the teenagers enjoying the night was 15-year-old Martha Moxley. Bright, athletic, friendly, the kind of teenager neighbors expected to see growing into adulthood with limitless possibilities. She spent the evening doing what countless American teenagers had done before Halloween for decades, walking with friends, laughing, teasing, enjoying the excitement that came with being young. No one watching her disappear into the evening could have imagined they were witnessing the final hours of her life. As darkness settled over Greenwich, Martha crossed paths with friends, including teenagers from one of the neighborhood's most prominent families, the Skakels. The Skakel household was well known in Belhaven, connected to one of America's most famous political dynasties through the extended Kennedy family. Wealth surrounded them. Influence surrounded them. Their home attracted attention long before investigators would ever arrive. The evening unfolded like countless others. Teenagers wandered from house to house. Conversations drifted across front lawns. Leaves crunched beneath sneakers. Nothing appeared unusual. Nothing warned that history was quietly taking shape. Hours passed. Eventually, Martha never returned home. At first, there was no immediate panic. Teenagers stayed out late. Mischief night often stretched well into the evening. Parents expected delays. Curfews bent. Excuses were common. Morning would change everything. When Martha failed to come home, concern spread rapidly through the Moxley family. Calls were made. Friends were contacted. Questions multiplied. Had anyone seen her? Had she decided to stay elsewhere? Had she gone somewhere without telling anyone? The answers never came. Instead, search efforts began. Neighbors stepped outside. Friends retraced familiar paths. Police joined the growing concern. Then came the discovery that would permanently scar one of America's wealthiest communities. Martha's body was found on her family's property. Not miles away. Not hidden in a distant forest. She was there, frighteningly close to home. The violence shocked even experienced investigators. She had suffered devastating injuries inflicted by a golf club. Part of the weapon had broken during the attack. The brutality suggested rage, persistence, or both. What had begun as an ordinary suburban evening had ended with one of Connecticut's most disturbing homicides. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Perfect neighborhood, perfect homes, perfect families, an imperfect truth. Someone had murdered a 15-year-old girl. Someone had walked away. News traveled quickly through Belhaven. Curtains moved as neighbors watched investigators. Police vehicles lined quiet roads that rarely witnessed anything more serious than traffic complaints. Television crews arrived. Reporters gathered. Residents who had once boasted about absolute safety suddenly found themselves answering questions no community ever wants to hear. Who could have done this? Was a stranger hiding among them? Or had the killer been someone everyone already knew? Investigators immediately faced a difficult reality. There were no surveillance cameras mounted on every house, no smartphones tracking movements, no digital footprints, no social media timelines reconstructing the evening minute by minute. The investigation depended almost entirely upon physical evidence, witness statements, memory, and painstaking detective work. Every conversation mattered. Every timeline mattered. Every inconsistency mattered. Police interviewed teenagers who had spent the evening with Martha. Each recollection added another fragment to an incomplete puzzle. Some remembered conversations. Others remembered seeing Martha walking. Several recalled her spending time near the Skakel residence during the festivities. The timeline slowly narrowed, yet certainty remained elusive. For detectives, the neighborhood itself became both an advantage and a challenge. Belhaven was small. Residents generally knew one another. Visitors often stood out. But familiarity also created complications. People assumed they understood their neighbors. Assumptions have a dangerous habit of replacing evidence. Rumors spread almost immediately. They moved faster than official announcements. Kitchen conversations became speculation. Speculation became neighborhood gossip. Gossip became headlines. Every unexplained detail generated another theory. Some wondered whether an outsider had slipped unnoticed into Belhaven. Others believed the answer rested much closer to home. The crime scene itself revealed a horrifying struggle. Investigators examined every blade of grass, every footprint, every broken branch. The damaged golf club quickly became one of the most significant pieces of physical evidence connected to the killing. Determining exactly where it had come from became an urgent priority. Detectives worked carefully. Nothing could be overlooked. Nothing could be assumed. Every minute after a homicide matters. Unfortunately, time is never generous. Memories begin fading almost immediately. Witnesses unintentionally alter details. Fear changes perception. Pressure changes recollection. Meanwhile, the killer gains distance. As investigators reconstructed Martha's final known movements, one uncomfortable reality emerged again and again. The last hours of her life appeared closely connected to people she already knew. That realization intensified scrutiny throughout Belhaven. Families who had shared dinners together suddenly questioned one another. Teenagers who had spent carefree evenings together found themselves interviewed repeatedly by police. Parents became protective. Lawyers entered conversations. Media attention expanded beyond Connecticut. The story possessed every element capable of capturing national interest. A wealthy community, a teenage victim, an apparently motiveless killing, influential families, an investigation filled with unanswered questions. The headlines practically wrote themselves. America watched. Inside the Moxley home, however, there were no headlines. Only grief. Every room carried reminders of a daughter who would never return. Every family photograph became evidence of something stolen forever. Birthdays would arrive. Graduations would come and go. Christmas mornings would pass. Martha would remain 15. For homicide investigators, emotional distance is often necessary. Evidence must speak louder than sympathy. Yet certain cases resist becoming ordinary files. The murder of a child rarely allows emotional detachment, especially when the community insists that such violence should have been impossible. The investigation expanded. Detectives examined relationships, friendships, schedules, family dynamics, potential motives. Nothing appeared straightforward. Some witnesses seemed uncertain. Others contradicted previous accounts. Small inconsistencies accumulated. Whether they reflected ordinary memory failures or something more significant remained impossible to determine in the early stages. Pressure mounted. The public demanded answers. Journalists demanded progress. The victim's family deserved justice. Yet certainty remained frustratingly out of reach. Days became weeks. Weeks edged toward months. Instead of clarity, investigators encountered increasing complexity. The physical evidence offered important clues, but not a complete narrative. Witnesses supplied fragments instead of certainty. Rumors continued multiplying. Every unanswered question encouraged another theory. Some residents stopped trusting one another. Others refused interviews. Some believed police already knew the truth. Others believed investigators were chasing the wrong leads entirely. The case began transforming into something larger than a homicide investigation. It became a test. Could wealth influence justice? Could social standing shape public perception? Could a prestigious community confront the possibility that one of its own might be responsible for unimaginable violence? Those questions would linger far longer than anyone expected. Years, not months. Decades, not years. The murder of Martha Moxley refused to disappear. New investigators would inherit old files. Journalists would revisit forgotten interviews. Books would be written. Documentaries would examine every decision. Courtrooms would eventually become part of the story, adding new chapters to a case that remained one of America's most closely watched criminal investigations. The legal proceedings that followed over the years would prove as contentious as the investigation itself, with convictions, appeals, and reversals ensuring that debate over the case never truly faded. But on that cold morning in October 1975, none of those future battles could be seen. There was only a quiet lawn. Fallen leaves stained by violence. Police tape stretching across a neighborhood that had believed evil existed somewhere else. Parents pulling frightened children indoors. Detectives staring at evidence scattered across the ground. And somewhere beyond the flashing lights, one undeniable truth lingered over Belhaven like an approaching storm. A 15-year-old girl had been murdered within sight of the place she called home. Someone knew what had happened. Someone carried the final moments of that Halloween Eve in memory. Whether through fear, silence, confusion, or something far darker, the complete truth remained hidden, waiting to test investigators, divide a community, and haunt American criminal history for decades to come. The first 48 hours after a homicide are often described as a race against time. Every passing minute gives memories a chance to blur, evidence an opportunity to disappear, and the person responsible another step farther from accountability. In Belhaven, investigators understood that reality all too well. The problem was not a lack of people to question. The problem was that nearly everyone knew everyone else. Every interview carried decades of familiarity, family friendships, and social expectations that could quietly influence what people remembered, or what they chose not to remember. Detectives returned to the neighborhood again and again, retracing the route Martha Moxley had taken on the evening of October 30th. They walked the same quiet streets beneath towering trees, whose leaves had already begun to blanket the sidewalks. They measured distances between homes. They examined property lines. They attempted to reconstruct the final hours of a 15-year-old girl whose ordinary evening had ended in extraordinary violence. The timeline slowly sharpened. Witnesses consistently placed Martha in the company of other teenagers during the early part of the night. She had participated in mischief night activities, laughing, talking, moving from house to house like dozens of other local teenagers. Nothing about her behavior suggested fear. Nothing indicated she believed she was in danger. That detail became deeply significant. Investigators found no convincing evidence that Martha had arranged to meet a stranger. There was no indication she had been lured away by someone unknown to her. Instead, the circumstances increasingly suggested that her final movements occurred among familiar faces. Detectives soon focused considerable attention on the Skakel residence, one of the last places where Martha had reportedly spent time that evening. The Skakel family occupied a unique position within Belhaven. Their wealth was well known. Their family connections attracted attention even outside Connecticut. To many residents, they represented privilege, influence, and social prominence. Under ordinary circumstances, those facts meant little to a criminal investigation. But extraordinary cases have a way of turning ordinary details into national fascination. Police interviewed members of the household separately. Each account mattered. Each recollection became another piece of an incomplete puzzle. Among those questioned were brothers Thomas and Michael Skakel, both teenagers at the time. Like many interviews conducted in the immediate aftermath of traumatic events, their statements reflected memories formed under stress and later scrutinized with extraordinary intensity. Investigators compared timelines. Who saw Martha last? When did each teenager leave the gathering? Who remained outside? Who returned home? The questions appeared simple. The answers rarely were. Human memory is imperfect even under ideal circumstances. Add shock, fear, media attention, and repeated interviews over weeks and months, and inconsistencies become almost inevitable. Detectives knew this. Still, they also understood that sometimes the smallest contradiction points toward the largest truth. Every version of the evening was carefully documented. Some witnesses recalled seeing Martha walking toward the Skakel property. Others remember conversations that ended abruptly. Several could describe what she wore. Others could not remember whether they had spoken with her at all. Each interview seemed to answer one question while creating two more. The physical evidence presented another challenge. The murder weapon appeared to have been a golf club, specifically a club believed to have originated from a set associated with the Skakel property. Investigators examined the broken shaft, the fractured head, and every available forensic detail. Yet forensic science in 1975 lacked many of the techniques that later generations would come to rely upon. There was no DNA profiling, no advanced touch DNA analysis, no sophisticated digital reconstruction. Fingerprints, blood evidence, fiber comparisons, and witness testimony remain the principal tools available. Modern investigators looking back decades later would often ask the same painful question. What evidence might have been discovered if today's technology had existed then? It is an impossible question to answer. Crime scenes exist only once. Every decision made in those first hours can never truly be repeated. Meanwhile, life inside Belhaven changed almost overnight. Children who had once wandered freely through the neighborhood now stayed indoors. Parents imposed earlier curfews. Doors that had rarely been locked were suddenly checked twice before bedtime. The illusion of absolute safety had vanished. People lowered their voices when discussing the murder. Dinner conversations became cautious. Eyes lingered a little longer on neighbors who had once inspired unquestioned trust. The community wanted reassurance. Police could not honestly provide it. Without an arrest, uncertainty became its own form of fear. Reporters continued arriving. Newspaper headlines expanded beyond Connecticut. Television broadcasts introduced viewers across the country to photographs of Martha Moxley, a smiling 15-year-old frozen forever in happier days. The contrast between her youthful image and the brutality of her death intensified public fascination. Why would anyone attack her so violently? What could possibly justify such rage? Investigators searched for motive. Jealousy, personal conflict, romantic rejection, accidental confrontation, random violence. Every possibility remained open. None fit perfectly. The absence of an obvious motive complicated the investigation enormously. Most homicides leave behind emotional traces, financial disputes, family conflict, domestic violence, long-standing grudges. In Martha's case, detectives struggled to identify a clear explanation capable of matching the ferocity of the attack. Violence without obvious motive often generates the greatest uncertainty. Without motive, every theory appears equally possible. Attention inevitably shifted toward behavior after the murder. who appeared unusually nervous, who changed routines, who avoided investigators. Such observations can be meaningful or dangerously misleading. Grief affects people differently. Fear affects memory. Public suspicion alters behavior. Detectives understood they needed evidence, not assumptions. Still, assumptions continued multiplying outside police headquarters. Belhaven had become a town divided between whispers and silence. Some residents believed the killer had already been interviewed. Others insisted police were protecting someone powerful. Still others argued investigators were allowing rumors to eclipse objective facts. The investigation entered a difficult phase. Leads arrived constantly. Anonymous phone calls, neighborhood gossip, speculation dressed as eyewitness testimony. Some tips consumed valuable investigative resources before collapsing under scrutiny. Others contained fragments of truth mixed with exaggeration. Sorting fact from fiction became a daily challenge. For Martha's family, every new rumor represented another emotional wound. Hope rose whenever newspapers suggested progress. Hope disappeared when no arrest followed. The cycle repeated endlessly. Months passed. The case remained open. Inside police files, interview transcripts accumulated. Maps, photographs, evidence logs, handwritten notes. Detectives revisited witness statements repeatedly, searching for overlooked inconsistencies. Sometimes the most important clue emerges not from new evidence, but from reading old evidence with fresh eyes. Yet fresh eyes often produce fresh disagreement. Different investigators reach different conclusions. Some believed the available evidence pointed in a particular direction. Others argued it remained insufficient. That tension would continue haunting the investigation for decades. The public rarely sees such disagreements. People imagine criminal investigations as straight lines leading inevitably toward justice. Reality is rarely so orderly. Cases twist. Witnesses recant. Evidence degrades. Theories evolve. Investigators retire. New detectives inherit thousands of pages written by strangers years earlier. The murder of Martha Moxley would eventually become exactly that kind of case. One generation of investigators handing unanswered questions to the next. Outside the official investigation, another force quietly shaped public perception. The media. Every article influenced conversation. Every television report introduced another interpretation. Journalists examined the privileged world of Belhaven with growing curiosity. Was wealth insulating someone from scrutiny? Were investigators receiving cooperation or resistance? Could social influence subtly affect an investigation, even without explicit interference? Such questions proved irresistible. Some reporting focused primarily on the tragedy itself. Other stories emphasized the prominence of families connected to the case. The result was a growing national audience following developments with unusual intensity. Yet publicity can be both ally and enemy. Media attention encourages witnesses to come forward. It also encourages speculation. Rumor spreads faster than evidence. Opinion often reaches conclusions long before investigators do. As weeks became months, detectives confronted another harsh reality. Physical evidence grows weaker with time. Witness confidence fades. Seasonal weather alters outdoor crime scenes. Memories reshape themselves through repetition. The investigation needed something decisive. A confession. An eyewitness. A breakthrough supported by objective evidence. None arrived. Instead, uncertainty hardened into permanence. The case entered the category investigators dread most. An unsolved homicide with substantial public attention. These investigations never truly disappear. They simply wait. Sometimes for months. Sometimes for years. Sometimes for generations. Inside Belhaven, Halloween acquired a different meaning. The annual tradition of harmless pranks no longer felt innocent. Parents remembered the night that had stolen one of their own. Teenagers who had laughed together before dawn grew into adults carrying memories they could never entirely escape. Some left Connecticut. Others remained. But none completely escaped the shadow cast by October 30th, 1975. For detectives, the file stayed active. Evidence remained preserved. Witnesses remained available. Hope, though diminished, survived. Someone, somewhere, knew more than had been revealed. Whether through guilt, fear, loyalty, or simple reluctance, the complete story remained locked away. Investigators could sense it. The community could sense it. Even those with no connection to Belhaven sensed an unfinished chapter. The murder had not simply taken a young life. It had fractured confidence in a community that believed itself immune from such horrors. Years would eventually pass without resolution, transforming the investigation from a current homicide into one of America's most discussed cold cases. Yet beneath the growing layers of speculation, legal maneuvering, and media attention, one truth remained unchanged from the very first day. A 15-year-old girl had walked into the crisp autumn night expecting nothing more dangerous than childish Halloween mischief. She never made it home. And somewhere, hidden among fading memories and unanswered questions, the truth continued waiting, silent, elusive, and just beyond the reach of everyone determined to uncover it. Winter settled over Greenwich with a quiet persistence that seemed almost cruel. The fallen leaves that had covered Belhaven on the morning Martha Moxley's body was discovered were replaced by frost, then snow, then another season altogether. Nature moved forward without hesitation. The investigation did not. Inside police headquarters, the case file continued to grow thicker, while the answers everyone desperately wanted remained just beyond reach. Cold cases are not born overnight. They become cold gradually, almost invisibly. First, the daily press conferences become weekly updates. Then the cameras stop appearing outside police buildings. Reporters are assigned to newer stories. Detectives who once spent every waking hour on a single investigation are pulled toward fresh crimes demanding immediate attention. The file remains on the shelf, but the urgency changes. That transformation had begun. For Martha's family, however, nothing had cooled. Every morning still began with the same impossible reality. Every evening ended with the same unanswered question. Who killed their daughter? The investigation continued, but detectives increasingly understood they were confronting more than a difficult homicide. They were navigating a landscape where memory, privilege, adolescent behavior, and public scrutiny intersected in ways few criminal investigations ever experience. The interviews never truly stopped. Months after the murder, investigators returned to witnesses they had already questioned multiple times. They asked the same questions in different ways. They compared every answer against previous statements. Even a slight difference could matter. What time did you last see Martha? Who was standing nearby? Which direction did she walk? What was said before everyone separated? Most people assume memory behaves like a recording device, preserving events exactly as they happened. Investigators know better. Memory changes. People unintentionally fill gaps. Conversations blend together. Details borrowed from newspapers slowly replace genuine recollection. Detectives had to distinguish between what witnesses actually remembered and what they had come to believe after hearing the story repeated countless times. Some interviews produced small discrepancies. Others revealed nothing new. Still, detectives persisted. One overlooked sentence could alter the entire investigation. Attention remained fixed on the final known hours of Martha's life. The Skakel residence continued to occupy a central place in that timeline, not because investigators had reached a definitive conclusion, but because multiple witness accounts consistently placed Martha there during the evening's mischief night activities. The challenge was determining exactly what happened after those shared moments ended. Teenagers came and went. Groups split apart. People wandered independently through the neighborhood. No one was documenting movements with timestamps. No security cameras captured driveways or sidewalks. Investigators were attempting to reconstruct a sequence of events that had unfolded naturally, casually, and without anyone imagining those ordinary decisions would later be dissected under extraordinary scrutiny. As detectives reviewed the physical evidence, one detail continued to command attention. The golf club. The attack had been so violent that the club itself fractured during the assault. Portions of the club were recovered, allowing investigators to examine its origin. The evidence suggested it was consistent with a club from a set associated with the Skakel household. That fact immediately raised difficult questions, but it did not, by itself, establish criminal responsibility. Evidence can suggest direction. It cannot replace proof. Detectives needed more. They searched for corroborating facts. Could fingerprints identify who handled the club? Could fibers establish contact? Could blood patterns reconstruct the attack? In 1975, forensic science offered far fewer answers than it does today. Many techniques modern audiences take for granted either did not exist or were still in their infancy. Investigators relied heavily on traditional methods, painstaking observation, and witness testimony. Each limitation mattered. Each missing technological tool represented another obstacle. The passage of time only deepened those obstacles. As months turned into years, the investigation entered an uncomfortable rhythm. Every so often, a new lead surfaced. A witness claimed to remember an overlooked detail. Someone reported hearing an old rumor repeated at a party. Detectives followed each possibility carefully. Most dissolved into dead ends. Rumors had become almost as common as facts. Some claimed a stranger had entered Belhaven that night. Others insisted the killer had been hiding in plain sight from the very beginning. Still others believed influential families were somehow shielding the truth. Investigators repeatedly stated that conclusions must rest on evidence, not speculation. Yet speculation proved impossible to contain. Every unresolved homicide creates a vacuum. In the absence of certainty, imagination rushes to fill the space. The media played an undeniable role. National publications revisited the case periodically, emphasizing the extraordinary contrast between Belhaven's image and the horror that had unfolded there. Articles described elegant homes, manicured lawns, and exclusive streets now forever associated with one of Connecticut's most infamous unsolved murders. The public became fascinated by that contradiction. How could something so brutal happen in a place that appeared so insulated from violence? The question lingered because it challenged a comforting assumption that wealth guarantees safety. It does not. Crime pays little attention to property values. Inside law enforcement, discussions increasingly focused on investigative strategy. Detectives debated which interviews deserved renewed attention. They reconsidered timelines. They scrutinized inconsistencies that once seemed insignificant. Sometimes the smallest unanswered question refuses to disappear. Why did certain recollections change? Were those changes natural? Or were they signs that fear, loyalty, or uncertainty had shaped earlier statements? No investigator could answer confidently. Cases involving teenagers present unique complications. Adolescents often remember events differently than adults. Friendships influence conversations. Peer pressure affects honesty. Fear of consequences, whether deserved or not, can discourage complete disclosure. Investigators had to consider those realities without assuming guilt or innocence based solely on behavior. Years passed. Teenagers became adults. The neighborhood changed. Families moved away. Some witnesses built careers. Others raised children of their own. Life continued. The murder remained. Every anniversary reopened old wounds. Every newspaper retrospective reminded the country that Martha Moxley's killer had not been definitively identified in a court of law. For her family, anniversaries were not media events. They were private reminders of time stolen forever. 15 never became 16. There would be no college graduation, no wedding, no future grandchildren. The investigation was measured not only in documents and evidence, but in milestones permanently erased. Meanwhile, The legal landscape surrounding homicide investigations across America was changing. Advances in forensic science began transforming criminal justice. DNA analysis emerged as one of the most revolutionary investigative tools in modern history. Cold cases once believed impossible to solve suddenly yielded answers after decades of silence. Families everywhere found renewed hope. Perhaps old evidence could speak again. Perhaps forgotten files still contained hidden truths. Investigators connected to the Moxley case inevitably revisited preserved evidence, asking whether modern techniques might reveal information unavailable in 1975. Some evidence could be re-examined. Other opportunities had already been lost. Crime scenes are fragile. Once altered, they cannot be recreated. Evidence not collected in the first hours may disappear forever. That painful reality haunts every cold case investigator. The longer a case remains unresolved, the greater the dependence on what earlier investigators preserved. The Moxley investigation became a lesson in both perseverance and limitation. It demonstrated the determination of detectives unwilling to abandon a victim. It also revealed the consequences of investigating a homicide before many modern forensic breakthroughs existed. Outside official channels, public interest refused to fade. Authors began researching the case. Television producers recognized its compelling mix of privilege, mystery, and tragedy. Legal experts debated investigative decisions. Former detectives offered differing opinions. Journalists uncovered forgotten interviews and revisited overlooked timelines. The story refused to remain in the past. Yet beneath every headline lay a simple, devastating reality. A 15-year-old girl had lost her life. That fact never changed. Everything else remained contested. Theories multiplied. Opinions hardened. Evidence continued to be interpreted through competing perspectives. The case had evolved beyond a police investigation. It had become part of America's broader conversation about justice, influence, memory, and the extraordinary difficulty of proving guilt years after a crime has occurred. Detectives understood something the public often overlooked. The passage of time is rarely neutral. It can strengthen a case if new evidence emerges. It can weaken one if memories fade and witnesses disappear. Every year that passed altered the balance. Hope remained. Certainty did not. Somewhere within thousands of pages of reports, interview transcripts, laboratory analyses, and handwritten notes, investigators believed the truth still existed. Not necessarily in one dramatic revelation, but scattered across countless details waiting to be assembled correctly. Whether those details would ever satisfy the demanding standard required in a courtroom remained another question entirely. For now, Belhaven continued living beneath a shadow that no amount of wealth or prestige could erase. The quiet streets looked peaceful once again. Children eventually returned to playing outside. Lawns recovered. Homes changed ownership. Autumn leaves continued falling every October. Yet anyone who knew the history understood that beneath the ordinary appearance of one elegant Connecticut neighborhood lay an unanswered question that had already survived years of investigation and showed every sign of surviving many more. Because some crimes end with an arrest. Others end with a conviction. And a rare few refuse to end it all, lingering in the minds of detectives, families, journalists, and an entire nation, waiting for the moment when one forgotten detail, one overlooked statement, or one long-buried memory might finally disturb the silence that had settled over Belhaven since that Halloween Eve in 1975. Time has a peculiar way of reshaping a murder investigation. In the beginning, detectives chase the future, convinced the next interview, the next laboratory report, or the next witness will unlock the truth. Years later, they begin chasing the past instead, reopening old files, replaying forgotten conversations, searching for something that may have been overlooked the first time. The murder of Martha Moxley had entered that second stage. The case was no longer driven by urgency alone. It was driven by persistence. Boxes of reports lined evidence rooms. Thousands of pages documented interviews, Timelines, sketches, laboratory findings, and handwritten observations from investigators who had long since moved on, retired, or passed away. Every page represented another attempt to answer a question that had never stopped echoing through Belhaven. Who killed Martha Moxley? The answer seemed tantalizingly close and impossibly distant at the same time. As investigators revisited the evidence, one uncomfortable reality became increasingly clear. The earliest days of the investigation had produced enormous amounts of information, but not all of it pointed in the same direction. Witnesses had offered overlapping accounts, conflicting recollections, and occasionally statements that appeared to evolve over time. None of that was unusual in a major homicide investigation, particularly one involving teenagers. What made this case unusual was the extraordinary attention every inconsistency would later receive. A forgotten sentence in one interview could become headline news years later. A slight change in wording could fuel endless speculation. A timeline adjusted by a matter of minutes could alter the public's perception of an entire case. Investigators understood the danger. The public often did not. They returned once again to the final known movements of Martha on the evening of October 30th, 1975. The chronology remained the foundation upon which everything else rested. Every witness had to fit somewhere within those final hours. Some remembered seeing Martha laughing outside. Others recalled watching groups split apart as the evening wore on. Several witnesses placed her near the Skakel residence during the latter part of the night. After that, certainty dissolved. No verified eyewitness could describe the attack. No one came forward claiming to have seen the fatal confrontation unfold. The silence surrounding those final moments remained one of the investigation's greatest obstacles. Silence, however, is rarely empty. Detectives know that silence can be created by fear, by confusion, by loyalty, or simply because no one truly witnessed what happened. Determining which explanation applied became increasingly difficult with every passing year. The investigation also highlighted another uncomfortable truth about criminal justice. Public opinion and legal evidence are not the same thing. Newspaper readers often believed they already knew who should be considered responsible. Television commentators debated theories with confidence. Neighborhood conversations reached conclusions unsupported by evidence. Inside police files, investigators faced a far stricter standard. Suspicion alone could never solve a murder. Evidence had to withstand scrutiny. Facts had to survive cross-examination. Every conclusion required support. Without that foundation, even the strongest suspicion remained only suspicion. As the years passed, interest in the case periodically surged whenever journalists uncovered new interviews or revisited older investigative material. Each renewed wave of publicity encouraged additional witnesses to contact authorities. Some offered genuinely new information. Others repeated stories they had heard from friends. Some honestly believed they were remembering events firsthand when, in reality, years of media coverage had blended with their original memories. Detectives approached every new statement cautiously. Human memory is remarkably vulnerable to suggestion. Psychologists have long demonstrated that repeated exposure to stories can subtly reshape recollection. Investigators in cold cases must constantly distinguish between authentic memory and memory influenced by decades of discussion. The Moxley investigation became an example of that challenge. Every witness mattered. Every witness also presented risk. Meanwhile, advances in forensic science continued transforming criminal investigations across America. DNA technology solved cases once considered hopeless. Fingerprint databases expanded. Crime scene reconstruction became increasingly sophisticated. Families of victims across the country celebrated long-awaited breakthroughs. Belhaven watched with cautious optimism. Could modern science finally answer questions left unresolved since 1975? Investigators revisited preserved evidence wherever possible, carefully evaluating what could still be tested using contemporary techniques. But technology cannot recover evidence that was never collected. It cannot recreate conditions that existed only during the original investigation. Every cold case is limited by the decisions made on the first day. The murder of Martha Moxley was no exception. Still, detectives refuse to abandon hope. Cold cases have been solved after 20 years, 30 years, even 50 years. Patience is often the final investigative tool. Outside law enforcement, another development quietly reshaped the case. Authors and investigative journalists began conducting extensive independent research. They interviewed former detectives, neighbors, attorneys, and individuals connected to the original investigation. Their work introduced the case to new generations unfamiliar with Belhaven or the events of 1975. Books examine inconsistencies. Television documentaries reconstructed timelines. Newspapers revisited old controversies. Each production generated fresh public interest. Some praised the renewed attention. Others worried it blurred the distinction between verified evidence and dramatic storytelling. The challenge became increasingly apparent. The more famous the case grew, the harder it became to separate established fact from accumulated speculation. Every major unsolved homicide eventually develops competing narratives. The Moxley case developed many. Some argued investigators had focused too narrowly. Others believed they had identified the correct direction early but lacked sufficient admissible evidence. Still others questioned whether social status had complicated investigative decisions. Those debates intensified rather than disappeared. For Martha's family, the public discussion carried a heavy emotional cost. Every anniversary brought renewed interviews. Every documentary reopened grief. Every headline reminded the world of a tragedy that had never truly ended. Families of homicide victims often describe time differently than everyone else. The calendar moves. Life changes. The loss remains fixed. The murder of Martha Moxley existed in exactly that space. A single night permanently separating life into before and after. As investigators reviewed the original interviews, they also confronted another reality common to long-running cases. People change. Teenagers become middle-aged adults. Priorities shift. Perspectives mature. Some witnesses become more willing to speak. Others become less certain of what they once believed they remembered. Fear that once prevented cooperation may fade. Conversely, confidence may diminish as decades pass. Detectives evaluated every new interview against the original records. Consistency strengthened credibility. Major contradictions demanded explanation. Yet contradiction alone proved nothing. People forget. People misremember. Sometimes people genuinely reconstruct events incorrectly without any intention to deceive. That complexity frustrated investigators and fascinated legal scholars. The case became more than a murder investigation. It became a study in memory itself. How accurately can anyone recall a single evening after decades have passed? How much confidence should courts place in recollections shaped by time? What weight should be given to circumstantial evidence when direct evidence remains limited? Those questions extended far beyond Belhaven. They touched the foundations of criminal justice. Eventually, renewed investigative efforts began generating significant legal developments that would bring the case back into national headlines. Prosecutors believed that the accumulated evidence justified moving forward, while defense attorneys argued the passage of time had weakened rather than strengthened the case. The courtroom would become the next battleground, where years of investigation, countless interviews, and mountains of evidence would face the rigorous demands of the legal system. But long before judges, juries, and appeals enter the story, the essential mystery remained unchanged. A 15-year-old girl had left home expecting an ordinary Halloween Eve. She never returned. A quiet neighborhood had awakened to violence beyond imagination. And for years, investigators had followed every lead, questioned every witness, examined every fragment of evidence, only to find themselves confronting the same haunting reality. Somewhere within the thousands of pages, beneath decades of rumor and speculation, hidden among fading memories and preserved evidence, the truth continued to exist. The challenge was no longer believing the truth was there. The challenge was proving it beyond doubt. The first thing they found wasn't the body. It was a single white sneaker. Lying on the damp shoulder of Black Pine Road, its untied lace swaying gently in the October wind, as if someone had only just stepped out of it. There were no footprints leading away, no blood, no signs of a struggle. Just a brand new sneaker, clean enough to suggest it hadn't been there long, abandoned less than 300 yards from the quiet suburban neighborhood where 16-year-old Emily Carter had been laughing with her friends barely an hour earlier. For decades, detectives would return to that image. Not the crime scene, not the suspect, the shoe. Because whoever left it behind wanted investigators to look in the wrong direction. And they did. For nearly 50 years. Ashridge, Colorado, had always considered itself invisible. It was the kind of mountain town where everyone knew the name of every cashier, every mail carrier, every high school football coach. Main Street stretched only a few blocks before giving way to dense forests of lodgepole pine and narrow roads that climbed into the Rockies. Crime was measured in stolen bicycles, broken windows, and the occasional drunken fight outside Miller's Tavern. Parents never worried when their children walked home after sunset. Front doors were left unlocked. Neighbors borrowed lawnmowers without asking. Nothing truly terrible had ever happened there. Until Halloween night, October 31st, 1974. The annual Harvest Carnival transformed Ashridge into something almost magical. Orange lights hung across Main Street. Homemade scarecrows stood beside storefronts. Children raced between booths carrying caramel apples twice the size of their hands. Teenagers gathered around bonfires, music drifting through the cold mountain air as laughter echoed across the valley. Emily Carter was everywhere that night. She won a stuffed bear at the ring toss. She posed for photographs beside the old courthouse clock. She shared fries with her best friend, Sarah Mitchell, while complaining about a history exam scheduled for Monday. Nothing about her suggested fear. Nothing hinted she would become the name every resident of Ashridge would remember for the rest of their lives. Emily wasn't the most popular girl at Ashridge High School. She didn't need to be. Teachers described her as curious, stubborn, and endlessly optimistic. She carried a second-hand camera everywhere, convinced that ordinary moments deserved to be remembered. Her bedroom walls were covered with photographs of sunsets, football games, abandoned barns, and smiling strangers who never realized someone had quietly preserved a piece of their lives. Her father used to joke that Emily noticed details nobody else could see. He never imagined that gift might place her in danger. Around 9 o'clock, the carnival reached its busiest hour. Music filled the streets. Families crowded the sidewalks. Costumed children darted between adults dressed as cowboys, witches, and movie monsters. Emily and Sarah wandered from booth to booth before meeting several classmates near the fountain in the town square. Witnesses would later remember fragments. Emily laughing. Emily adjusting the strap of her camera. Emily teasing a friend about his ridiculous vampire costume. Small memories. Harmless memories. The kind that become priceless only after tragedy. At approximately 9:40 p.m., Sarah told investigators she decided to head home with her older brother. Emily declined the offer of a ride. "It's only a few minutes." Those were believed to be among the last words she ever spoke to her closest friend. The walk home should have taken less than 10 minutes. Straight down Willow Street, across the wooden bridge, past the old church, left onto Black Pine Road. Her family's house stood at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac where porch lights remained on long after midnight. She never arrived. At first, nobody noticed. Teenagers were unpredictable. The carnival continued late into the evening. Parents assumed children had stopped to talk with friends. Emily's mother finished washing dishes around 10:30 before glancing toward the living room window. The porch remained empty. She checked the driveway. Nothing. She called Sarah's house. Emily wasn't there. Within 30 minutes, Emily's father was driving through town, stopping beneath every streetlight, rolling down the truck window to ask anyone still outside if they had seen his daughter. Most answered with the same sentence. "I saw her earlier." Earlier. The most frustrating word in any missing persons investigation. By midnight, local police joined the search. Officer Daniel Brooks knew the Carter family personally. He had coached Emily's Little League softball team years before. Now he found himself organizing volunteers with flashlights, dividing search grids, checking parks, hiking trails, and abandoned cabins. The temperature dropped below freezing shortly after 1 in the morning. If Emily had been injured somewhere in the mountains, every passing hour mattered. Search dogs arrived before sunrise. They picked up Emily's scent near the carnival entrance. Then along Willow Street. Then, nothing. The trail vanished, as if she had simply disappeared into thin air. No evidence suggested she had willingly left town. Her purse remained missing. Her camera was gone. She had made no plans to run away. Friends described her as excited about applying to college. Her bedroom remained untouched, homework still spread across her desk. Every detail pointed toward one conclusion. Something had interrupted her journey home. News spread faster than the sunrise. By breakfast, Ashridge no longer felt like the same town. Store owners left their businesses to join search parties. Church bells rang unexpectedly as volunteers gathered outside City Hall. Helicopters from neighboring counties circled the surrounding forests. The sheriff requested assistance from state investigators before noon. Hours became an entire day. Then another. Every creek was searched. Every abandoned mine inspected. Every hunting cabin unlocked. Nothing. Parents hugged their children tighter. Teenagers stopped walking anywhere alone. Fear spread through Ashridge with astonishing speed. Not because anyone knew what had happened. Because nobody did. Rumors filled the silence. Some claimed a hitchhiker had been seen near the highway. Others whispered about an unfamiliar pickup truck parked outside the carnival. A waitress insisted she had overheard 2 strangers arguing inside Miller's Tavern. None of it could be verified. Still, every rumor felt possible. Detective Harold Gaines arrived from Denver on the 3rd morning. 20 years in homicide investigations had taught him one painful lesson. The longer someone remained missing, the smaller the chance of finding them alive. He never shared that thought with the Carter family. Instead, he promised them everything possible would be done. He intended to keep that promise. At 8:17 a.m., a volunteer searcher named Robert Ellis noticed something white beside Black Pine Road. At first, he assumed it was litter. Then he stepped closer. A sneaker. Women's size 7. Nearly new. One lace still tied. The other dragging across damp leaves. Detective Gaines knelt beside it without touching anything. There were no obvious signs of blood. No torn fabric. No footprints clear enough to preserve. Just the shoe. He ordered the area sealed immediately. Search teams expanded into the surrounding forest. Less than an hour later, another volunteer shouted from somewhere beyond the trees. The kind of shout no investigator ever forgets. Not panic. Not surprise. Recognition. The search had ended. Emily Carter was found in a shallow clearing hidden beneath towering pines, less than 200 yards from the road. Autumn leaves covered part of her body, as though the forest itself had tried to conceal what had happened. Her camera was missing. Her necklace remained. Her wallet still contained $12. Nothing suggested robbery. Nothing about the scene made immediate sense. The medical examiner would later conclude she had died from severe blunt force trauma to the head. There were additional injuries indicating she had fought desperately. Broken fingernails. Bruises across both forearms. Small traces of skin beneath her nails. Evidence that, in another era, might have identified her attacker within days. But in 1974, science had limits. DNA profiling did not yet exist. The evidence was collected carefully, stored meticulously, then placed into sealed boxes that no one imagined would remain unopened for half a century. Detective Gaines stood silently at the edge of the clearing long after everyone else had begun documenting the scene. Something bothered him. The body, the shoe, the missing camera. They didn't fit together. If Emily had been attacked where she was found, why was one shoe left so far away? If she had been abducted, why abandon only one sneaker? If the killer wanted to hide the crime, why leave behind evidence that practically invited investigators into the forest? He said nothing. Not yet. Good detectives ask questions before offering theories. By sunset, national reporters were already arriving in Ashridge. Headlines appeared before investigators had even completed the first round of interviews. Honor student found dead after Halloween festival. Mountain town shattered by brutal killing. Parents across Colorado saw Emily's school photograph on the evening news. A smiling 16-year-old with bright eyes and windblown hair. The image burned itself into the public's memory. Back inside police headquarters, detectives pinned a large map of Ashridge across the incident room wall. Colored strings connected witness statements. Photographs covered corkboards. Every confirmed sighting of Emily received its own index card. One by one, investigators reconstructed her final evening. At 9:42 p.m., she was seen leaving the carnival. At 9:46 p.m., a retired couple reported seeing a teenage girl matching her description crossing the wooden bridge. At approximately 9:49 p.m., another witness believed he noticed someone standing beneath the flickering street lamp near Black Pine Road. He couldn't identify the person. Only a silhouette. Tall. Motionless. Watching. At the time, it seemed insignificant. Years later, detectives would return to that statement again and again, wondering whether the killer had already been waiting in the darkness long before Emily ever began walking home. Detective Harold Gaines had investigated enough murders to know that every crime scene told two stories. The first was the one the killer wanted everyone to see. The second was the truth. Standing in the clearing beneath the towering pines, he couldn't shake the feeling that the first story had been arranged with unsettling precision. The crime scene looked chaotic. Broken branches. Scattered leaves. A torn sleeve on Emily Carter's jacket. Yet something about the disorder felt controlled. Too many signs of struggle in one place. Too few in another. He crouched beside a patch of flattened grass, several feet from the body. No blood. No drag marks. No broken twigs leading toward the clearing. If Emily had fought as fiercely as the medical examiner believed, the forest should have carried the scars of that battle. Instead, the earth remained strangely untouched. Gaines slowly stood. "Photograph everything twice," he told the forensic team. "No assumptions." The youngest technician looked confused. "You think she was killed somewhere else?" "I think," Gaines answered quietly, "someone wants us to think she died here." The sentence lingered in the cold morning air. No one replied. By noon, the incident room inside the Ashridge Sheriff's Office had transformed into controlled chaos. Coffee cups covered every desk. Maps stretched across the walls. Phones rang almost without pause. Each call brought another tip, another rumor, another supposed witness. A hunter claimed he had seen headlights deep inside Black Pine Forest shortly before midnight. A waitress insisted she recognized a stranger asking for directions during the carnival. An elderly woman reported hearing a scream carried by the wind. Most leads contradicted one another. Some contradicted themselves. Still, every report had to be logged. Every name had to be checked. Because somewhere inside the noise, that might be the truth. Emily's parents sat together inside interview room 2. Neither had slept. Her mother clutched Emily's scarf tightly enough to whiten her knuckles. Her father stared at the tabletop, as though afraid to look anywhere else. Detective Gaines hated these conversations, not because they were difficult, because they were necessary. "When was the last time Emily seemed frightened?" he asked gently. Both parents shook their heads. No one hated her. Any arguments? No. Anyone paying unusual attention to her? Again. Silence. Then Emily's mother hesitated. There was... She stopped. Gaines waited. There was someone who kept calling. The room became perfectly still. Who? We never knew. How many times? Maybe 6, maybe 7. What did he say? Nothing. Nothing. He'd wait until Emily answered. Then breathe. Just breathe. The detective slowly lowered his pen. When did the call start? About 3 weeks ago. Did you report them? Her husband answered this time. We thought it was some stupid teenager. Gaines exchanged a glance with his partner. For the first time, the investigation had something concrete. Telephone records in 1974 were primitive compared to modern standards. Tracing anonymous calls required time. Sometimes weeks, sometimes months. But detectives immediately requested every available record from the local exchange. If someone had been repeatedly calling the Carter home, they intended to find him. Meanwhile, Deputy Lisa Moreno focused on Emily's missing camera. Unlike jewelry or cash, the camera held little resale value. Yet it had vanished. That made it important. Emily carried it everywhere. Friends joked she photographed everything. Football games, dogs, clouds, old buildings, strangers. Moreno visited every shop in Ashridge asking the same question. Has anyone tried selling a second-hand camera? Every answer came back identical. No. The absence bothered her. Criminals usually stole valuables. This killer had ignored cash, ignored jewelry, but taken the camera. Why? Unless the camera contained something. That evening, the forensic laboratory delivered its preliminary findings. No usable fingerprints. No identifiables to impressions. Fibers from dark-colored wool. Tiny flecks of automotive paint. Blue. Metallic blue. Not enough for identification. Enough to raise questions. One technician added another detail. There was pine resin on her jacket. Gaines frowned. We found her in a pine forest. Not this kind. The technician slid a microscope photograph across the table. The resin is fresh. So, it comes from recently cut timber. Ashridge had only one active logging operation. North Ridge Lumber. Nearly 12 miles away. Far from Black Pine Forest. The detective leaned back. If the resin truly originated there, Emily had been somewhere she wasn't supposed to be. Or someone had brought part of that location to her. By the 4th day, reporters had begun camping outside the sheriff's office. Satellite trucks crowded Main Street. Microphones appeared wherever detectives walked. Questions came nonstop. Do you have a suspect? Was Emily targeted? Should residents fear a serial killer? The sheriff repeated the same statement. We're pursuing every lead. It satisfied no one. That night, Ashridge High School held a candlelight vigil. Hundreds attended. Students stood shoulder to shoulder across the football field. Teachers cried openly. Parents embraced children who suddenly seemed much younger than they had only days before. Detective Gaines remained in the background, watching, listening. Criminals often returned to scenes connected with their crimes. Sometimes out of guilt, sometimes curiosity, sometimes arrogance. He studied every face. Most showed grief. Some showed fear. One showed nothing. A young man stood alone beneath the stadium lights, hands inside his jacket pockets, expression empty, watching everyone else instead of the ceremony. Gaines approached slowly. Before he could speak, the teenager disappeared into the crowd. The following morning brought another surprise. A photographer from the Ashridge Gazette arrived, carrying several rolls of undeveloped film. "We cover the carnival," he explained. "Hundreds of photographs." Detectives immediately established a viewing room. Frame after frame flickered across a projector screen. Children laughing. Costume contests. Fireworks. Crowds. Emily appeared repeatedly, smiling, talking, walking. Then, frame 117. The room fell silent. Emily stood near the courthouse clock, looking away from the camera. Behind her, half hidden by a telephone pole, a tall man in a dark military-style jacket, his face obscured by shadow. Nothing unusual at first glance, until Detective Moreno noticed something. "Go back." The projection stopped. She stepped closer. The man's right wrist was visible beneath his sleeve. He wore an unusually large watch. Not common. Square-faced. Heavy steel bracelet. Military issue. Detective Gaines narrowed his eyes. What time was this taken? The photographer checked his notebook. 9:36. 4 minutes before Emily began walking home. The detective stared at the mysterious figure. No one had mentioned him. None of the witnesses remembered him. Yet there he was, captured forever on a forgotten strip of film, standing only yards behind Emily Carter, watching, not smiling, not speaking, simply watching. Gaines felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Every major investigation has a turning point, a single piece of evidence that changes everything. He wasn't certain why, but deep inside, he knew he was looking at it. Detective Gaines pinned the enlarged photograph to the center of the evidence board without saying a word. The room gathered around it. At first glance, nothing stood out. A crowded town square. Teenagers laughing. Children running between booths. Orange lanterns swaying above Main Street. Then the eye drifted toward the background. Toward the man. He wasn't participating in the festival. He wasn't talking to anyone. He wasn't looking at the fireworks or the carnival games. He was looking at Emily. Every detective in the room noticed it within seconds. "The angle," Deputy Moreno whispered. "What about it?" "He isn't watching the crowd." She stepped closer. "He's watching her." Silence settled across the room. Gaines finally spoke. "Find him." The photograph became their entire world. Forensic technicians enlarged every inch of the frame. The resolution collapsed into grains of silver. The man's face remained hidden beneath the brim of a dark cap. No identifiable features. No license plate. No reflections. Only fragments. A military-style field jacket. Heavy leather boots. The square watch. And something else. A ring. On his right hand. Plain. Wide. Black. Not a wedding band. Something thicker. Moreno circled it with a grease pencil. Could be military. Gaines shook his head. Could be anything. But somebody knows him. The next morning, officers began knocking on doors with fresh copies of the photograph. They visited every business along Main Street. Every restaurant. Every gas station. Every motel. Most people studied the picture before shrugging. No idea. Never seen him. Too blurry. Hours passed. Nothing. Then an elderly barber named Walter Henson stared at the picture much longer than everyone else. "I've seen that jacket." Gaines leaned forward. "Where?" Not here. Walter scratched his chin. About 2 weeks ago. Doing what? He was asking questions. What kind of questions? Walter's eyes narrowed. About the old logging roads. Northridge lumber sat 12 miles outside Ashridge. A sprawling complex surrounded by endless stacks of freshly cut pine. The scent of sawdust hung permanently in the cold mountain air. Detectives arrived before sunrise. The manager, Frank Donnelly, greeted them with visible confusion. We already gave statements. We're not here about the murder, Gaines said. We're here about a man. He laid the photograph across the desk. Donnelly adjusted his glasses. I can't identify him. No. The jacket. What about it? We sell dozens just like that every winter. Gaines felt his optimism fade. Anyone asking unusual questions recently? The manager hesitated. There was one fellow. When? Late October. What did he want? He wanted an old access map. Why? Said he liked hiking. You gave it to him? No. Why not? The roads had been closed for years. Moreno wandered outside while Gaines continued interviewing workers. Something caught her attention. Fresh tire tracks. Not unusual. Except one set veered away from the loading area, toward an abandoned maintenance shed. The building looked forgotten. Windows broken. Door hanging slightly open. Dust covered almost everything inside. Almost. Near the back wall. A rectangle of clean concrete. Something heavy had been sitting there recently. Something no longer there. She crouched. A faint smear of metallic blue paint. The same shade reported by the forensic laboratory. Her pulse quickened. Back at headquarters, another discovery arrived. Telephone company technicians had completed their preliminary tracing report. The anonymous calls to Emily's house had not come from random payphones. Most originated from public booths. One did not. That call had been placed from a private business line. Northridge Lumber. Room 3 fell completely silent. No one spoke for nearly 30 seconds. Finally, Gaines looked toward the sheriff. Now we have a reason. The entire logging company became the focus of the investigation. Personnel files. Employment records. Former workers. Temporary contractors. Truck drivers. Mechanics. Nearly 80 names. Every one required examination. Most had solid alibis. Some had never met Emily. Others weren't even in town that night. The list slowly grew shorter. 79. 72. 64. 51. Then, one name stopped everyone. Daniel Mercer. Seasonal mechanic. 38 years old. Former Army engineer. Worked irregular hours. Lived alone. Resigned 3 days after Halloween. No forwarding address. No explanation. Moreno stared at the personnel photograph. It's him. Gaines looked again. The face was older than the blurred figure in the carnival photo. Different hairstyle. Different beard. Yet, the eyes. Cold. Unfocused. Almost detached. Not enough, Gaines said quietly. But it's the closest we've got. Mercer's rented cabin stood empty. The landlord hadn't entered since October. Dust covered the furniture. The refrigerator remained unplugged. One bedroom. One wood stove. One narrow closet. Nothing remarkable. Until Moreno opened a kitchen drawer. Inside lay dozens of undeveloped rolls of film. Photography film. Exactly the type Emily used. Every detective froze. The evidence technician carefully lifted one canister into a paper bag. No fingerprints. Still bag it. The film laboratory worked through the night. One by one, the negatives emerged. Landscapes, mountains, roads, birds, old buildings. Nothing suspicious. Then another strip appeared. Teenagers leaving school. Another. Emily riding her bicycle. Another. Emily outside the public library. Another. Emily sitting alone beside the river. The room became deathly quiet. None of the photographs appeared staged. She had never looked toward the camera. She never seemed aware someone was watching. Mercer had been photographing her. For weeks. Maybe longer. The sheriff requested an arrest warrant immediately. The district attorney refused. Not enough. He stalked her. Apparently. He vanished. Yes. We found her film in his cabin. We found film. The prosecutor folded his hands. Not proof. Gaines hated hearing that word. Proof. He understood it. He respected it. He also knew murderers often escaped because investigators confused certainty with evidence. Mercer looked guilty. That wasn't enough. 3 days later, a hunter discovered an abandoned pickup truck deep inside the national forest. Registration: Daniel Mercer. Detectives rushed to the location. The truck had been stripped. Engine gone. Seats removed. License plates missing. Whoever abandoned it intended never to return. Inside the glove compartment remained only one item: a folded road map. The old logging roads had been marked in red pencil. One route circled repeatedly, a forgotten trail leading toward Black Pine. That evening, Gaines spread every piece of evidence across the conference table. The sneaker, the photograph, the phone records, the missing camera, the surveillance photographs, the abandoned truck. Individually, none proved murder. Together, they painted a terrifying picture. A man who had watched Emily, called her home, disappeared immediately after her death, left behind enough evidence to create suspicion, but never enough to guarantee conviction. Moreno noticed Gaines hadn't touched his coffee. You think we're too late? He looked toward the window. Outside, snow had begun falling over Ashridge. I think, he answered slowly. He planned this long before Halloween. What makes you say that? He picked up one of Mercer's photographs. Emily walking home from school. Taken from nearly 200 yards away. He wasn't hunting a victim. He was studying one. The words settled heavily over the room. Because predators who study learn routines, learn habits, learn shortcuts, and rarely stop with just one plan. Somewhere beyond the mountains, Detective Gaines believed Daniel Mercer was still alive, still driving, still disappearing into towns where nobody knew his name. But what neither Gaines nor anyone else in that room realized was that the investigation had already overlooked the single piece of evidence capable of proving everything. It had been sitting inside the sheriff's evidence locker since the first day. Logged, photographed, sealed, and almost completely forgotten. The evidence locker smelled of cardboard, machine oil, and old paper. Detective Harold Gaines had walked past its steel shelves hundreds of times without a second thought. Every major investigation left behind its own collection of forgotten objects: mud-stained clothing, broken jewelry, handwritten notes, cigarette packs, keys that no one could identify. Most never mattered. Some changed everything. The clerk unlocked a gray cabinet and slid out a long cardboard box marked simply, Case 74 to 118. Carter, Emily. Personal effects. Inside lay carefully sealed evidence bags. A wristwatch with a cracked crystal. A silver necklace. A school notebook. One white sneaker. The contents of her purse. And beneath them, a tiny transparent envelope no larger than a postage stamp. Gaines frowned. I don't remember this. The clerk adjusted his glasses. It was logged the afternoon the body was recovered. What's inside? The older man held the envelope toward the light. A fragment. A fragment of what? No one ever figured that out. The envelope contained a piece of dark plastic barely half an inch long. Jagged on one side, smooth on the other. Under ordinary light, it looked meaningless. Under magnification, tiny molded ridges appeared along one edge. Manufactured. Not natural. Deputy Moreno leaned closer. It broke off something. Gaines nodded. But what? There were no labels. No follow-up reports. No additional testing. In 1974, investigators had apparently examined it briefly before moving on to more promising evidence. Now, 50 years later, it looked different. Not because the fragment had changed, because the investigation had. The State Crime Laboratory agreed to run a modern material analysis. The technician spent nearly 2 hours examining the fragment beneath a digital microscope. Finally, he removed his gloves. I've seen this before. Gaines looked up. Where? It's not automotive. No. No. The technician rotated a three-dimensional scan on his monitor. It's photographic equipment. Moreno blinked. Camera. Not exactly. What then? A film canister latch. The room fell silent. Emily's missing camera suddenly became far more important than anyone had imagined. For decades, investigators assumed the camera had simply been taken. Now another possibility emerged. The killer hadn't stolen it. He had broken it. If the latch had snapped during a struggle, the camera might have opened. Film might have fallen out. Or the killer might have removed it. Not because the camera itself mattered, because what was inside did. The search returned to Black Pine Forest. Winter had transformed the landscape. Snow covered the clearing where Emily had been found. The old crime scene photographs became their map. Every tree, every rock, every fallen log. Ground-penetrating radar swept across the area. Metal detectors followed. Hours passed. Nothing. Then Deputy Moreno stopped beside an enormous pine stump. Wait! She knelt. Something reflected beneath layers of compacted soil. Not metal. Glass. Carefully, forensic archaeologists began brushing away dirt that had remained untouched for half a century. 1 hour later, a camera emerged. Cracked. Weathered. Almost unrecognizable. But unmistakably Emily's. The entire laboratory gathered around the discovery. Most expected disappointment. Moisture destroys film. Time destroys almost everything else. Still, the camera contained one roll. Unprocessed. Protected inside its metal housing. The film specialist handled it like an ancient manuscript. If we're lucky. He didn't finish the sentence. No one wanted false hope. Development required extraordinary care. The negatives emerged slowly. Frame 1. Overexposed. Frame 2. Children at the carnival. Frame 3. Sarah laughing beside the fountain. Frame 4. Fireworks. Frame 5. Blurry lights. Frame 6. Completely black. Then, frame 7. The technician froze. What? He didn't answer. Instead, he turned the image toward Gaines. Emily had accidentally photographed someone. The image wasn't composed. It wasn't intentional. The camera had apparently fired while hanging from its strap. The result captured only the lower half of a man's body. Heavy boots. Military trousers. And a square-faced watch. Exactly like the one in the newspaper photograph. Another frame. A hand reaching forward. Black ring. Same hand. Same ring. Frame 9. Nothing but darkness. Frame 10. Blurred motion. Then the roll ended. The room remained silent. Not because the photographs identified the killer. They didn't. But they proved something investigators had never known. Emily encountered the mysterious man after leaving the carnival. Close enough for her camera to capture him. Gaines pinned the new photographs beside the originals. The timeline shifted. The stranger hadn't merely observed Emily from across the square. He had followed her. That changed everything. Premeditation. Surveillance. Opportunity. Yet one question remained unanswered. Why Emily? Out of every teenager walking home that night, why her? The answer arrived unexpectedly. Not from evidence. From Emily's bedroom. Her parents had preserved the room exactly as she left it. Books remained on the shelves. Posters still covered the walls. Dust had settled over everything. Moreno carefully examined boxes beneath the bed. Photo albums. School papers. Old notebooks. Inside the final notebook, she found a folded newspaper clipping. The article described a fatal construction accident that had occurred 8 months before Emily's murder. One name had been circled repeatedly. Daniel Mercer. Not as the victim. As a witness. Moreno frowned. Why would a 16-year-old girl keep this? She flipped another page. Taped beside the clipping said a handwritten note. Something doesn't match. Nothing else. No explanation. Just 4 words. That evening, Gaines visited Emily's former journalism teacher. Mrs. Eleanor Briggs smiled sadly as she welcomed him inside. I've been expecting someone eventually. You knew about the article? She nodded. Emily wanted to be an investigative reporter. Gaines leaned forward. She was researching Mercer? Not Mercer. The accident. Mrs. Briggs disappeared into another room before returning with a folder. Emily thought the company lied. What company? Northridge Lumber. According to official records, a maintenance platform had collapsed, killing one worker instantly. Mercer told investigators the victim ignored safety procedures. The company accepted that explanation. Case closed. Except, Emily had interviewed another worker for a school assignment months later. His story differed completely. He claimed the platform hadn't failed. Someone had disabled it. Emily became fascinated. She believed someone had covered up the truth. She kept asking questions. Questions adults ignored. Questions that may have reached the wrong ears. Gaines slowly closed the folder. For the first time, the murder had something resembling a motive. Not obsession alone. Silence. If Emily had unknowingly uncovered evidence connected to an earlier death, someone desperate enough to hide one crime might commit another. He looked toward the dark window. Snow continued falling across Ashridge. Half a century had buried evidence beneath forests, inside forgotten boxes, and within fading memories. But the past had begun fighting its way back. And somewhere, if Daniel Mercer was still alive, he had no idea that a broken camera, a forgotten notebook, and 10 blurred photographs had just reopened the door he believed he had sealed forever. By the following morning, the investigation no longer belonged to the past. It was moving again. Not quickly, not dramatically, but with the slow, deliberate momentum of a machine that had finally found a gear it hadn't engaged in 50 years. Detective Harold Gaines stood before the evidence board in silence. The faces pinned to the corkboard looked different now. Emily Carter, Daniel Mercer, Northridge Lumber, the mysterious construction accident, the anonymous phone calls, the missing camera. For decades they had existed as separate pieces. Now invisible lines began connecting them. Not enough for an arrest. Enough to ask better questions. Ashridge had changed. The old lumber mill had closed in the late 1980s. Its rusting buildings still stood at the edge of town like forgotten monuments to another era. Broken windows reflected gray winter skies. Tall weeds pushed through cracked concrete. The enormous saw blades had long since stopped turning. Nature was reclaiming the place. Detective Moreno parked beside the collapsed security gate. "This place gives me a bad feeling." Gaines looked toward the silent buildings. It probably gave someone else the same feeling 50 years ago. Inside the administration office, dust covered every cabinet. Most company records had been boxed before the mill shut down. Thousands of payroll sheets, maintenance reports, employee files, shipping invoices. An archivist from the County Historical Society had spent years cataloging everything. Fortunately, he never threw anything away. Hours passed as detectives searched brittle folders. Nothing. 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 Then Moreno stopped. "Harold!" He crossed the room. She slid a faded maintenance log across the desk. The date immediately caught his attention. October 28th, 1974. 3 days before Emily disappeared. One handwritten entry had been crossed out so aggressively that the paper itself had nearly torn. Using a flashlight from the side, Gaines could still make out the original words. "Security camera, east loading dock, malfunction, film removed." He stared at the sentence. "Security camera." Moreno nodded slowly. "I thought these places didn't have surveillance back then." "They usually didn't." "So why did this one?" The answer came from another file. Northridge Lumber had installed a primitive time-lapse camera overlooking the loading dock after a series of equipment thefts. It photographed the yard every 30 seconds during working hours. The system wasn't sophisticated. It wasn't continuous video. Just thousands of still photographs. Enough to document who entered and left the property. Enough, perhaps, to capture a murder. But the log says the film was removed. Gaines turned another page. No record explained where it went. No evidence tag. No police request. No archive number. The film had simply disappeared. That evening, Gaines visited Frank Donnelly. The former mill manager now lived alone in a small farmhouse outside Ashridge. Age had bent his back. Memory had softened his voice. But when he heard the words, "East Loading Dock," something changed. His hand stopped moving. "You remember." Donnelly looked away. "I've spent 50 years trying not to." They sat in silence for nearly a minute. Finally, Donnelly spoke. "There wasn't one accident." Gaines remained still. "There were two." "What do you mean?" "The newspaper only reported one." "The construction worker." "Yes." "And the second?" Donnelly closed his eyes. "A truck driver." According to Donnelly, a delivery driver named Victor Hale had disappeared the same afternoon the maintenance platform collapsed. The company assumed he had quit. His truck remained. His paycheck remained. His family kept asking questions. Eventually, the questions stopped. So nobody investigated. They looked. And they never found him. Gaines felt his pulse quicken. "Was Mersha there?" Donnelly answered without hesitation. "Every minute." The old man's voice had begun to tremble. "I should have gone to the police." "Why didn't you?" "They told us not to." "They..." Donnelly hesitated. "The owners." Northridge Lumber had been Ashridge's largest employer. Hundreds depended on it. A scandal could bankrupt the company. According to Donnelly, executives insisted both incidents were unrelated. The construction death was ruled accidental. Victor Hale was labeled a runaway. Business continued. Nobody wanted more questions. Except Emily Carter. She had unknowingly reopened a story everyone else wanted buried. Her school journalism project had taken her through old newspaper archives. She noticed the same inconsistency Gaines now saw. One man dead. Another vanished. Same day. Same location. Same witness. Daniel Mercer. Back at headquarters, Moreno compared employment records. Another coincidence emerged. Mercer had not worked at Northridge before the accident. He was hired 2 weeks earlier. No previous employment history. No local references. No military discharge papers despite claiming Army service. Everything about him before arriving in Ashridge existed only because he said it did. "He's a ghost," Moreno whispered. "No." Gaines looked toward the board. "Ghosts leave no paperwork." Mercer had. Every document. Every signature. Every address. They all existed. The problem was, none of them could be verified. A request went out nationwide. Fingerprints. Military records. Driver's licenses. Tax documents. Nothing matched. Daniel Mercer had never existed. The name was an invention. The realization struck the task force like a physical blow. For 50 years they had searched for the wrong man. Not because the suspect was innocent, because the suspect wasn't real. Whoever killed Emily Carter had vanished behind an identity built from paper. And paper burns. 3 weeks later, an unexpected call arrived. It came from Arizona. Retired Deputy Marshal Samuel Ortiz had been watching a television documentary about the reopened investigation. One photograph caught his attention. The square watch. "I've seen that watch." Gaines flew to Phoenix the next morning. Ortiz unlocked an old filing cabinet inside his garage. "I'm retired," he said, "but I keep copies." He removed a yellowed wanted bulletin dated 1968. A bank robbery in New Mexico. One suspect had escaped. The image was grainy. The face partly obscured. But the watch. The watch was unmistakable. Same square case. Same steel bracelet. What happened to him? Ortiz sighed. He disappeared. Name. We never learned it. The fugitive had used 4 different identities across 3 states. Each abandoned after a violent incident. Each supported by counterfeit documents. Each ending exactly the same way. He vanished before police closed in. Emily's killer may have begun killing years before Ashridge ever heard his name. Returning to Colorado, Gaines stared at the evidence board until long after midnight. This case had grown larger than one murdered teenager. Larger than one town. Perhaps even larger than one state. If Mercer was only another false identity, how many others had existed before it? How many came after? How many families had buried children without ever realizing they shared the same invisible predator? Then the phone rang. Moreno answered. Her expression changed immediately. "What is it?" She covered the receiver. "The lab." "What now?" "They finished enhancing the last frame from Emily's camera. I thought it was unusable." "So did they." Gaines grabbed his coat. "What did they find?" Moreno looked directly at him. "They found a reflection." "A reflection of what?" She swallowed. "Not what?" "Who?" 20 minutes later, the lights inside the forensic laboratory were still blazing. The image filled an entire projection screen. Frame 10. The blurred photograph everyone had dismissed. Artificial intelligence had stabilized the motion just enough to reveal one tiny detail. In the chrome trim surrounding Emily's camera lens. A reflection. Small. Distorted. But visible. Not Emily. Not the man reaching toward her. Someone else. Standing several feet away. Watching everything happen. A second person. Someone investigators had never considered. someone who had remained invisible for 50 years. And judging by the direction of the reflection, they weren't trying to stop the attack. They were standing beside the killer. The laboratory fell into absolute silence. No one moved. No one spoke. Every pair of eyes remained fixed on the enlarged photograph projected across the wall. The reflection was barely larger than a thumbnail. A warped silhouette trapped inside a sliver of polished chrome. 50 years earlier, it had been dismissed as nothing more than a blur. Now, enhanced with modern imaging techniques, it had become the most important piece of evidence in the entire investigation. "There were two of them," Deputy Moreno whispered. Detective Harold Gaines didn't answer. He stepped closer until the light from the projector illuminated half his face. The reflection revealed almost nothing. A broad-shouldered figure. A dark overcoat. A hat with a narrow brim. Most importantly, the second figure wasn't facing Emily. He was facing the first man, standing close enough to speak, close enough to help, or close enough to give orders. For 50 years, investigators had assumed Emily encountered a lone predator. That assumption had shaped every interview, every search warrant, every theory. Now everything had changed. The case wasn't becoming simpler. It was becoming larger. Much larger. The forensic imaging specialist adjusted another series of filters. "There's something else." He isolated a tiny section near the edge of the reflection. "What are we looking at?" "A vehicle." The chrome captured part of a parked automobile. Not much. Just a section of the front grille. One headlight. A hood ornament. Gaines leaned forward. "Can you identify it?" The specialist enlarged the image again. Pixels blurred into colored squares. Then slowly, the outline sharpened. "I think." He stopped himself. "What?" "I need to compare it." By sunrise, the comparison was complete. The hood ornament matched a very specific model. A 1971 Lincoln Continental Mark III. Dark blue. Less than 20,000 had been manufactured. An expensive luxury car. Not something commonly seen in Ashridge during the 1970s. Moreno immediately returned to county vehicle records. Most had long since been transferred to archives. Hours passed. Then she found exactly 3 Lincoln Continentals registered within 50 miles of Ashridge in October 1974. One belonged to a retired judge. One belonged to a doctor. The third belonged to Northridge Lumber, registered as an executive company vehicle. The room grew quiet again. The company had already been linked to the mysterious construction accident, to Daniel Mercer's employment, to the anonymous phone call. Now, possibly, to the murder scene itself. "Who drove it?" Gaines asked. The archivist shrugged. "There isn't a permanent assignment, so anyone could have used it. Executives mostly. Names." One by one, personnel files appeared on the conference table. President, Vice President, Operations Director, Chief Accountant, then Executive Security Consultant, Arthur Whitmore. Unlike the others, Whitmore's file contained almost no background information. No resume. No previous employer. Only a contract. 6 months. Consulting services. Security restructuring. The contract ended November 2nd, 1974. 2 days after Emily Carter's murder. Moreno looked up. "That's impossible." Gaines wasn't so sure. "Find him." The search lasted nearly 2 weeks. Arthur Whitmore had disappeared as completely as Daniel Mercer. No tax records after 1975. No boletim registration. No driver's license renewals. Nothing. It was as if the man had stepped off the face of the earth. Until a fingerprint technician made an unexpected discovery. Decades earlier, Whitmore had signed a visitor log inside the county courthouse. The fingerprint left in dried ink was almost invisible. Modern scanning recovered enough ridge detail for comparison. The result arrived just after midnight. No match for Arthur Whitmore. But a partial match existed in another file. A federal file. Classified. The FBI requested an immediate meeting. Gaines expected resistance. Instead, 2 agents arrived carrying a single black binder. No introductions. No small talk. The senior agent opened the file. "You've been looking for Arthur Whitmore." "Yes." "That wasn't his name." Gaines almost laughed. "Neither was Daniel Mercer." The agent nodded. "We know." Inside the binder were photographs spanning almost 20 years. Different hairstyles. Different beards. Different glasses. Different names. One face. Always the same eyes. Cold. Expressionless. Patient. "Who is he?" Moreno asked. The FBI agent hesitated. "We don't know." "What?" "We've chased him since 1963. Across how many states?" "At least 9. "And you still don't know his real identity?" "No." The man had become something of a legend inside federal law enforcement. A professional identity thief. Counterfeit documents. Financial fraud. Disappearances. Possible homicides. Always operating under new names. Always disappearing before investigators assembled the full picture. Each jurisdiction believed they were chasing a different suspect. Only years later did federal analysts recognize the pattern. Too late. Every trail had already gone cold. How many victims? The older agent looked down. "We can prove 7. "And the real number?" He didn't answer immediately. "Probably much higher. Emily Carter." Had never been his first victim. Perhaps not even his last. The room remained silent as Gaines turned another page. One photograph caught his attention immediately. Taken in Nevada. The unidentified suspect stood beside another man. Tall. Broad shoulders. Dark overcoat. Navajo-brimmed hat. The second figure from Emily's reflection. They worked together. The FBI agent nodded. "We've always believed so." "Who is the second man?" "We've never identified him." A partnership. Not a lone killer. Not an isolated murder. An organized pair moving from town to town beneath stolen identities. One committed the violence. The other erased the evidence. One attracted attention. The other disappeared before anyone noticed. Together, they had remained invisible for decades. Back in Ashridge, Gaines reopened every unsolved disappearance within 200 miles between 1972 and 1976. Most shared nothing in common. Until he found the Henderson file, a 17-year-old gas station attendant. Missing. Never found. Last seen. 3 weeks before Emily's murder. Working the night shift. Northridge Lumber Company truck stopped for fuel shortly before midnight. Driver listed as Daniel Mercer. The pattern had finally begun revealing itself. Emily wasn't chosen randomly. She wasn't even the only victim connected to Ashridge. She was simply the one case that refused to stay buried. Late that evening, Moreno entered Gaines' office carrying another box from the archives. "You should see this." Inside were payroll photographs from Northridge Lumber's annual company picnic. Summer. Employees stood together beneath bright sunshine. Families smiling. Children playing baseball. Mercer appeared near the back. So did Arthur Whitmore. Nothing unusual. Until Gaines noticed someone standing between them. Frank Donnelly, the former mill manager. The man who had claimed he knew nothing. The man who insisted he had stayed silent out of fear. In the photograph, he wasn't standing beside them by accident. One arm rested comfortably across Mercer's shoulder. The three men were smiling, like old friends. Gaines slowly lowered the photograph. For the first time since reopening the investigation, he wondered whether the witnesses had been hiding the truth, or whether some of them had been protecting it all along.